which does not always align with your financial bookkeeping system at your campus, if you're on a campus, or a county system. And so, for example, at Humboldt State, our bookkeeping system is on a state fiscal year. So we keep our books from July 1st through June 30th, but then we have this calendar year grant that breaks over those two different bookkeeping systems. So we have to figure that out. And we have other grants that are cash match grants that might go over a 3-year period. And at any given time, we have SBDC grants, which right now we're in 2017. We are spending down our 2017 grant funds from January through December of 2017. And we also are still thinking about last year, 2016, and we're finishing up with fiscal reviews. And I went and saw some centers last month. I'm going to be seeing some centers next week, and then another round in May. And so doing final invoices for 2016 and the fiscal reviews. And then next month, we're going to start talking about the proposals to apply for 2018 funding. And so you're having to balance 3 years of SBDC grant funding at any given time, plus all the different cash match grants that would be associated. And so it gets to be this complicated juggling match a lot of times. So let's go through this.
Hi, Shawn. We can't see the PowerPoint on the screen.
Oh,
I wasn't sure if that's what.
Okay. Well, we are just about to start it, so apologies. But thank you, Rebecca. Is that working now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So there's a 24-month cycle for every program year of the contract. And that's sort of, we'll walk through the steps, but that's sort of what I was talking about, is that you're always either spending down the grant, or you're managing it after the fact, or you're managing the proposal process before the grant period. So the next program announcement for SBA is going to be published hopefully in May. We're still waiting on it. And I was just on a national call, and they said that they're still working on the details. So the lead center will get the proposal, which we talked about on the last webinar, what the program announcement was. It's the lead center's version of the grant instructions for how we're going to turn in our proposal to Washington, D.C. So we'll get those instructions in May, and then we're going to provide a simplified version of the proposal instructions to each of the county SBDCs and ask for them to submit their portion of the funding request, which then at the lead center, we roll up into, a large request that goes to Washington. The request for the next year's work plan and proposal is due to your lead center in June. And then we work out any, revisions that are needed, and it needs to be finalized by July. The region proposal goes to SBA in September. Before that, though, it needs to be finalized here at the lead center. And so your portion from your center needs to be finalized. Then our big roll-ups need to be finalized. It goes up to our host, and it has to be routed and signed off by, I think, like 5 different people in 5 different offices, and go through all that approval process, all the double checking and triple checking. And then that's why it's such a huge lead time to finally get this all together. And unfortunately, we have to do this every single year. So it just feels like we just finished it and we have to start over again. Hopefully not too much changes each year in your center so that you don't have to start from scratch. You can look at your spending from your closeout of 2016 as a really good starting place of what you're spending for 2018 might be, give or take some changes that you anticipate. Some of the things you'll do is look at refinement of goals and activities between the lead center and the service center during the September and October period. There'll be a letter of intent from SBA to the lead center, and that'll usually happen in December. And then there's a letter of intent from the lead center to the service centers, and that happens in December. So you might remember that right before we left for holiday break, there was a letter that went out saying that the lead center and Humboldt State sponsored programs intend to have a contract for 2017 SBDC spending with your host for the certain dollar amount, and that contracts will be coming out at the beginning of the year. And so that's sort of letting your host know that things are in progress, everything's okay, and that's what that's about. Then there's a 12-month performance period so that the grant is effective from January to December. Assure local hosts, they will be paid January until the contracts arrive. So that's for new hosts. We're going to be having a new host at Marin Dominican University. So that's always a question that new hosts have is, okay, we're starting services, but when do we get paid? And centers, as many of you know, need to be able to float the expenses basically for probably 6 months, because if there's spending happening in January, February, March, then the first quarterly invoice is submitted it has to be finalized by the end of April. And then we're going to do our reviews and get it down to our accounting in May. And then your host will get a check in June. So it really is kind of a long timeline. Contract from the SBA to the lead center, that usually happens in April or May. So we do not, we have an initial contract right now from SBA for spending through April 28th because there was a continuing resolution. And that means that the US Congress did not pass a full budget for January, well, it would be federal fiscal year for October through September 30th. Therefore, we only have approved spending through April 28th. And if there are concerns at the national level, sometimes we don't have the budget passed in a timely way, and the government shuts down some years for a couple of days, and then we finally do get a budget passed. But we've never had it that it just, there was no funding. It's been okay eventually, but sometimes there's this confusion that it takes a while to finally get a full contract, and so we've gotten used to it. The contract from the lead center to the service center hosts, you should hopefully get your full amount in April or May. It normally should not affect your spending because the amount of the contract that you have right now, which is a portion, should cover your first quarter. And so you're going to turn in your first quarter's invoice, and it's going to be covered by the amount you have approval to spend right now. And by the time that you get to turning in your second quarter invoice, which is going to be at the end of July, we'll have the finalized version of the contracts out. And so I've never had a problem where it didn't work out, that we didn't stay on cycle anyway. The local center host sets up the financial accounts for the new contract in May or June. That's actually, I would say that's not, yeah, that probably should be revised, that you would need to have the accounts set up that you're spending against. If you're doing fund accounting, that you would need to have a segregated fund for your SBDC. So I apologize for that, but that should say that that should be set up by January, and that so that you can make sure that the expenses are posted as they're coming in January or February when they would be hitting. 12-month performance period will end in December, so January through December. And then you'll go through closeout in January and February. And so for 2017, you'll be doing your final invoice, which will be due January 31st of 18 at that point. And then program and fiscal reviews by the lead center will, a year from now, be happening in April and May of 2018, looking back at 2017. So it's this managing the cycle. At any given time, the service center will be managing 3 years of the SBDC grant, so I've mentioned that. The prior year contract, January through February, you'll be processing expenses from last year and ensuring accurate financial closeout. March, you'll be preparing documents for lead center financial review. March through May, host financial review site visits. June through December, on call to respond to requests from SBA regarding document requests for financial examinations. So the reason we have this cycle is that as soon as we process your final invoice, we want to make sure that I come out and do the financial review site visits, because we can get requests from Washington, D.C. for our regional examination anytime after that. And so I want to make sure that each county's documents are set, there aren't any extra concerns that we have, and we're ready to go and be on call at the national level if needed. So the current contract, January through March, you're going to be initiating spending on the current grant and ensuring match spending is proportional. And so that's important, that you're spending on the federal side, but also it's a one-to-one matching grant. So you need to make sure that you're also spending cash match, and if you have any in-kind that you're going to be collecting, that's also happening. We are a little bit lenient at the Q1 point, April through March invoice, but at Q2, we do kind of a hard match check that each center absolutely needs to be at one-to-one match or above. We love overmatch, but you need to, at a minimum, be at one-to-one. April, submit the Q1 invoice to lead center for reimbursement. April through June, continue spending on the current grant and ensure match spending will equal the federal at mid-year check. July, submit Q2 invoice. That'll be at the middle of July. We ask that you submit a draft invoice, and then we also absolutely need to know what your spending is going to be, because HSU is going to be closing their books for their fiscal year. So it's really hard for us at the lead center, because we're trying to manage our hosts' need to do accruals into the correct fiscal year by July 30th, as well as processing invoices and making sure that you have enough time to get your federal expenses as well as your cash match together. So we have a sort of hybrid way that we ask the centers to submit what their estimated accruals will be for their federal expenses, and we can give you a little more time to get the match together and the full invoice packet together. July through September, continue spending and ensuring match requirements are met. October, submit the Q3 invoice. Review expenses, and if needed, submit a budget modification. So at the Q3 point, you'll have spending January through September. You have 3/4 of your spending done. That's when we ask for you to project that final quarter and let us know if you need a budget modification. And we'll be talking about that in an upcoming training. October through December, continue spending grant funds. If needed, Lead Center will issue an amended award if the budget modification was submitted. Any questions? Okay. So the next year contract, so that would be thinking towards 2018 as we're trying to manage all of this. So January through June, discuss any concerns, upcoming changes with the Lead Center. So you're already starting to think, okay, what are some changes that will be happening in the future? May, Lead Center will request proposals for the next year. June and July, the proposals are submitted to the Lead Center. September, Lead Center submits the proposal to the SBA. September through December, contact Lead Center to inform them of significant revisions to proposal submission prior to formal notice of award being issued by SBA. So I know that some of you, it's a frustrating process when there's some back and forth about proposals or invoices with the Lead Center. And this is where, like on number 5, this is where it happens to me, that I submit the region proposal to Washington, and they come back to me and they tell me things that need to be fixed with 13 different budgets and all the different backup support with that. And so that's when I'm coming back to you. I know this from past experience. I'm trying to get it corrected before I submit it to Washington, and some poor person in Washington has to look at all this and give feedback on 13 different budgets, and then we have to talk later, and it holds up our notice of award and all of that. So those are the reasons why. Other calendars and cycles to consider. So of course there's proposals, the closeout of the grant, and then there's also your cash match sources, when to ask for local money, and other money grant cycles. There might be other federal grants that you have that support your programs but are not counted in the SBDC invoice process, but you do need to, of course, pay attention to that. Local host calendars. So the example I was giving of our bookkeeping system that our accounting department processes all of our expenditures here for our Lead Center, for Marin SBDC, for TFG, North Coast. Are we hosting anyone else? I think that's it right now. And then they also process all the quarterly invoices for the GoBiz grants and the SBDC quarterly invoice packets. And we therefore need to be respectful of their time frames and what their staffing is and their calendar closeout time periods for June 30th cutoffs and things like that, and planning ahead for that. Performance reviews from all funding sources, conferences, kind of planning ahead so that if there is a due date for any of these reports, that you've kind of worked that out, that if you're going to be gone when something is due, that you're planning ahead and you're going to still be able to meet deadlines. Because otherwise things can kind of pile on top of each other, and turning them in late is not a great option, because then you're going to get behind on some other deadlines and it just kind of snowballs. So that's the end of the PowerPoint. I was going to just show you a little bit about the region calendar. And we have a way that you can link the region calendar to Outlook calendars too. But any questions about this information?
None for me, thank you.
Okay. So I'm trying to get my screen to switch here, just a second. All right, is the region calendar showing up for everyone?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so if you haven't seen it before, this is our 2017 NorCal SBDC region calendar. And it's listing, it's actually an Excel document that can sort a couple different ways. That it can sort by this category here towards the right, or it can sort by month, and we can send out different versions. So this particular one, it's saying it's sorted by category right here. So you can see that in February, there's meetings here, they're national meetings, and it says who's participating. It's the lead center. And then in September, we're seeing that there's in September, there's some days, the 5th through the 8th, that's a national conference in Tennessee, actually the 4th through the 8th. And that is for center directors as well as lead center staff. And so you can kind of go down and see if something is going to be an actual meeting, a call, a holiday, region meetings, then reporting deadlines, which I think a lot of us on this call would be the most interested in. So, and you can see where it says service centers here. So for our purposes on this call, I think paying attention to anything that's talking about deadline, for some of the centers have a GoBiz subaward from Humboldt State sponsored programs, as well as an SBDC subaward. So hopefully you know if your center has those or not. And so on this one, January 30th, the deadline for GoBiz fiscal and programmatic reporting, that is looking back at the October through the December prior year. The final signed version of those reports need to be submitted. And the lead center sends out an email always to the center director, giving those instructions, usually a month in advance. So we're going to be having a Q1 invoicing deadline coming up. So let's just look at that as an example. See if I can, why is this pulling? Okay, so this is the deadline that's going to be coming up here, is these April ones. And so right now, the lead center staff are working really hard to get the GoBiz invoice templates ready to go for Q3 for GoBiz, because it's on a state fiscal year cycle. And then for SBDC to get it ready for a brand new yearly cycle and get the Q1 invoice together. and we'll be sending those out by April 1st. And they'll always go to the center director. We try to include the administrative staff and the fiscal staff. Sometimes there's turnover and we miss someone or something. So if you're in fiscal and you haven't seen an email, maybe check in with the center director and they can forward it to you and let us know so we can update our lists, who things should be going to in the future. So that's what the deadlines will be looking like, and it'll tell you if it's a programmatic deadline or a fiscal deadline, and it'll say deadline. So the other part is site visits, lower down, that you can see if let me see if there's site visits, for example. There's programmatic site visits as well as fiscal site visits. So you can see March 8th, there was a site visit, a fiscal site visit for Solano. And
So I have a
yeah.
question. The invoice, you just said something about the invoice for April. What was the, I don't know, and then you went into other things. So what was it that we needed to know about the invoicing for April?
Yeah, so invoicing for April, there will be quarterly invoices due in April. That is good to emphasize that. So January through March spending is wrapping up. Got a couple more days. And so then there will be invoices for centers that have GoBiz funding for them to submit an invoice for January through March. And then also for the SBDC, which is what we're focusing on, for January through March. And so we ask that you get those that information together, and you would be submitting a quarterly invoice the middle of April, specifically April 13th. And then we will review a draft of that information at the lead center and provide notes about anything we notice that is not making sense to us or we need more clarification. And so what we ask is, please make this as final as possible, and please have 2 sets of eyes on it at your center so that it's not like a draft, but it's as final as you think it's supposed to be. And then we're going to also look at it so that from prior experience, we used to wait until April 30th and have people turn in their invoices, and they would be signed off and supposedly ready to go, but we would honestly find a lot of mistakes, and then the deadlines get pushed back further and further, and centers are being stressed that they're not getting paid sometimes, especially in the case of the smaller nonprofits that we have that really need to worry about cash flow. So we came up with this idea that please do your best to have accurate quarterly invoice packets, but then the lead center staff are going to help and also do a review and provide feedback. And then maybe all together, we're going to meet that April 30th deadline, and that the invoice packets really are ready to go to accounting by that date, and we're not going to get behind schedule. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else to say about that. Yeah, I know that centers do the invoices differently, and different people, some of the center directors are involved with preparing the invoices and some aren't at all. But I really think it's important that it's a joint effort, because if financial staff are preparing the invoices, they might not realize some expenses that were misposted and need to be transferred to a different grant, that the center director needs to be helping in reviewing, are all of these expenses appropriate? Maybe I'm trying to think of examples that I remember years ago, I was reviewing an invoice and there were expenses for greenhouse supplies, I think, on some general ledger. And an accounting person isn't going to necessarily know what the SBDC grant is for and can we charge greenhouse supplies or not. And the answer is no, by the way. But that's what the center director, someone from the programmatic side, needs to be looking for appropriateness of the charges. And so that's why we need both sides of the house. And then another thing is making sure that the accounting staff are double checking that all the math is correct, because if a center director is helping with the preparation, they might not be taking out a 10 key and double checking that everything is ticked and tied and cross-checked and verified. And we just need both people working together. So that's the best match. Okay. Anything else about that? Alrighty. Then the last thing I was going to show you is how we have some instructions, and I won't, go into all this detail because, and can you guys see an instruction sheet? Get a yes or no?
The top part of it, not necessarily a full screen.
Is it? It's not showing instructions to import a calendar.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. That looks better.
Okay. So we do have instructions if you do use Outlook, which I do, on how to import a region calendar into Outlook. And we also have the calendar in Gmail too, if you have a Gmail email address, that I think it would work with that as well. So anyway, we can send you this information. It's also in the regional Dropbox, which each county service center has a regional Dropbox, and there's one login per center because we have to pay extra for each login. So if the center director has that information and they can share it with admin support, they can share it with fiscal, so that you can all have access to the same information. So you can just kind of scroll down, there's screenshots, it tells you what to do. So yeah, if that's helpful. So that was everything that I had. Is there anything else that people had questions about how to manage, or tips if you've been doing this for a little bit? Tips or questions? I think kind of a tip for me is just not recreating the wheel. Is just, you probably have a lot of this information already, because if there was a proposal, for example, that's coming up, you can look at last year's proposal, but even better is to look at your last closeout information too, from a financial perspective, because those were the real dollar amounts versus some projections, and you can use that.
What do you mean closeout? What does that mean?
Oh, I'm sorry. So when your final invoice, so for example, when Mendocino turned in their last October through December year-end invoice, I would look at how much you spent for all of January, December of 2016, and then use those dollar amounts when looking at preparing your 2018 proposal.
Got it. Okay.
And that would maybe be a good frame of reference on how to start. And then you can kind of change things around depending on, you know, what changes. Obviously, you had a change in who was the director, for example, and things like that. But yeah.
Great, thank you.
And I guess another thing too is that might get confusing or people have questions about sometimes is when you turn in this first quarter's invoice, January through March, don't make it harder than it needs to be and just turn in what expenses are posted right now. So expenses don't need to, let's say, if you have advisors that are independent contractors, and so they're working in March, and so their March expenses are going to be submitted at the beginning of April, and at your host, they're going to be processed and posted in April or May. Well, that's fine. Don't worry about that. Just turn in the general ledger support for whatever expenses have made it through the accounting system and have been posted during the January through March time. And that might just be January and February invoices. And then we'll just pick up the March invoices the next round on the quarterly invoices. Because then you'll be submitting whatever general ledger support is April, May, June at the end of July. That makes sense. But any questions about that?
No, I mean, I, for one, just have to do it and then I'll have the questions. I can't think of the questions that I don't know. I don't even know what to ask, so.
From which center?
Mendocino.
Oh, Mendocino, Marianne. You're okay. Well, because Ruth has been there for a long time, and so you're lucky in that sense for your fiscal staff.
Right, right.
So, and because you're using QuickBooks and you guys are so timely about processing your invoices, you're going to actually get all your March expenses through and posted, and by the time you turn in your invoice in April. So what I'm saying actually doesn't necessarily apply to you, but for the larger institutions, I'm thinking Solano is a community college, trying to see, you know, any of the community colleges, municipalities, we have that issue at HSU that we're going to get these invoices, Santa Cruz, I see Santa Cruz on here. We're going to get these invoices in at the beginning of April for March, and we're going to be sitting here writing check requests and verifying the NeoSera backup and doing everything. And they're going to get down to our accounting department the middle of April, and then they're not going to get posted for a while. So those expenses are not going to be counted when we're doing our January through March reporting, and that's okay. The only thing that really matters is when we need to pick up all the expenses is when we do that final invoice for the year, which is the October through December. And we just did that. We did it for 2016, and it was due at the end of January 2017. And so that's when you have to do this scramble and really grab every single last expense and get it in the right invoice. But kind of throughout the year, it can be more flexible. So that's something we can kind of keep talking about. And Marianne, you don't need to worry about it too. All right, any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. And I'll send out the YouTube link if there's, in the next couple of days, if there's anyone you know that are colleagues that wasn't able to attend that you think should. And if there's anyone that I'm leaving off the list of who should be attending that you would like to send me their names or something, please feel free to do that, and we'll just keep getting a bigger and bigger email list. And I'll send out a link for the next training too. And I'll see some of you next week. All right, thank you so much.